Ever since Sharon Osbourne said that she had to remove a band from Back to the Beginning after she was having issues with their manager, and then said band was apparently trying to profit. As we know, Back to the Beginning was a charity concert. The speculation has run rampant about who the band in question could be. I did a video breaking down some of the more common theories. I'll put a link down below if you want to check that out. But despite literally a million different bands being speculated, one band in particular has been brought up and suggested nonstop, none other than Mötley Crüe, of course, given the history between them and Ozzy going way back to the 80s. Ozzy, of course, took them on their first big tour back in the day. As I've mentioned before, Mötley Crüe also did Ozzfest in 2010. And now Nikki Sixx has somewhat acknowledged Mötley Crüe's absence from that event in a post over on X, when a fan wrote to him and said, "Mötley Crüe wasn't invited to perform at Black Sabbath's farewell. Would you have liked to have been there?" And then Nikki responded and said, "We have been having health issues within the band." Now, obviously, he doesn't get into specifics, but I would say that it's probably safe to assume that he is referring to Vince Neil, who has definitely had something going on lately, although we do not know what. He's never said it. But Mötley, of course, had that big Las Vegas residency scheduled for this spring. But then a few months ago, they announced that they had to postpone it to the fall so that Vince Neil could get a surgery that his doctors had advised him to do. Again, the medical issue, though, was never specified. And that was back in March when that announcement was made. We don't know exactly when the surgery was, but probably somewhere near when that announcement that they had to postpone the residency was made. But then a month later, in early April, it was announced that Mötley Crüe had to cancel their appearance at Boardwalk Rock in Maryland. That festival was in May, and it's kind of crazy because Alice in Chains ended up replacing Mötley Crüe, but then Alice in Chains had to cancel due to medical reasons. Their drummer Sean Kinney had a medical emergency, so Rob Zombie actually ended up taking the spot on super short notice. And then on top of that, I think it was about a month or so ago, early June, Vince had to cancel a solo show in Niagara Falls that he was doing with Stephen Pearcy, so Sebastian Bach actually jumped on in his place. I don't think an explanation was ever given for that, at least as far as I know, so it would be total speculation to say that it was, again, due to medical reasons, but certainly worth pointing that out, I felt. So I assume that those things are what Nikki Sixx is referring to when he says that there's been health issues within the band, but you know, of course, within that statement, it is kind of open-ended. He never confirms that Mötley was ever at one point part of it. He doesn't say they were kicked off, nothing like that, which, you know, something, I guess, on a bit of a sidebar here, but you know, like I mentioned earlier, we know Back to the Beginning was a charity event. The proceeds went to 3 different charities: Cure Parkinson's, Acorn Children's Hospice, and Birmingham Children's Hospital. And Sharon says that the mystery band was kicked off because they wanted to profit, but saying kicked off, at least to me, implies that that band had already agreed to do the show, and you would think that that would have been discussed up front ahead of time, that there wasn't going to be any compensation. I mean, I don't know, I guess I'm just speculating, but normally whenever you go to book a band, the first thing that you discuss is the compensation, or in this case, the lack thereof. So I don't know, that's just really my 2 cents on that, something I wanted to point out. But I have also seen people say that Sharon is just making all this up just to be in the news. There was never a band that was kicked off. She just wants to stay in the headlines. But let's continue on as if this is actually real. There was, in fact, somebody kicked off of Back to the Beginning. Because Nikki Sixx's statement, again, it doesn't really say that they were ever involved or anything. I guess maybe that he implies that they at least wanted to do it, but there's health issues, so they can't. It's also very possible, as I've said before, that even if Mötley was on it, it was announced with them, all that, it is very, very possible, given everything going on with Vince, that they would have had to cancel anyways. So, anyways, is it possible that Mötley Crüe was the band that was removed from Back to the Beginning? Yes. But to that point, 3 out of the 4 members in the band have made posts acknowledging Ozzy and Black Sabbath, thanking them, etc. The only one that hasn't is Vince Neil. There was this post from Nikki Sixx earlier this week, which I showed in my last video, where he thanked Ozzy and Sharon for basically breaking Mötley Crüe back in 1984. And then John 5 posted this video on his Instagram a couple of days ago where he's playing guitar, and he wrote a caption that just says, "We love you, Ozzy."
Ozzy, thank you so much for all of the music, the tours, and you've been in all of our lives, most of our lives. And I just want to say I love you and thank you for all of the music and the memories.
And then Tommy Lee actually talked to the New York Times right before Back to the Beginning, along with 4 other rock musicians. Lars Ulrich, who of course played the event with Metallica, Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins, who was also there obviously, Lita Ford, which was another notable omission from Back to the Beginning in my opinion. I thought it would have been super, super cool to hear her do Close My Eyes Forever. And then, you know, as we know, David Draymond and Lizzie Hale were there. They did a cover of Close My Eyes Forever back when David Draymond was doing his sideband Device, so that could have been another option as well. But anyways, the other musician that the New York Times talked to is Rob Halford. He already explained why Judas Priest couldn't do Back to the Beginning, because they were doing a Scorpions 60th anniversary show in Germany on the very same night. But anyways, the musicians were talking to the New York Times about the impact of Ozzy and his legendary career and all that. And Tommy actually had some nice sentiments to share about Ozzy. Here's a little bit of what Tommy Lee said to the New York Times. Ozzy is a real big reason why we're still here. I can't emphasize enough how generous he was when we toured together in the early 80s. Usually headliners reserve a bunch of lights and give openers a fraction of the PA system, so the opening band isn't as loud as the headlining act. Ozzy was like, you can have all the lights, have all the sound, have a blast. And that really moved me. I never really experienced that sort of generosity and equality that he wanted for everybody. So I guess, yes, it is still possible that Mötley Crüe was the band in question that was kicked off of Back to the Beginning for apparently wanting to profit and sharing having issues with their manager and all that, which I guess too, that's another valid point. It is possible that the band themselves, whoever that may be, they may not even know about this situation. You know, bands are always kept in the dark from their manager, their agents, etc. However, I will say when it comes to Mötley, Nikki Sixx is so involved in the business side of the band, heavily involved. He probably would have at least known about this, but you know, with everything that we know, I mean, for me at least, it is kind of hard to imagine the Mötley Crüe was the band that was kicked off, given all of the posts that everybody made. You know, if there was drama, you would think that they wouldn't want to do anything to celebrate Ozzy or, you know, as in Nikki's post, celebrate Sharon as well, especially since she's the one being vocal about all this. So, you know, that's just kind of my take on it. I would love to know your thoughts. And again, Mötley Crüe is just one of many, many bands being speculated. I just wanted to specifically look at Mötley right now as they are getting brought up nonstop, like I said. But let me know your thoughts on Mötley, anybody else you might think it was. Slipknot is another one that I've been hearing a ton about lately. A lot of people think that that was the mystery band. Maybe we can dive into that in another video. I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully we don't have to wait too much longer for Sharon to reveal who it was. But until then, that is all that I got for you. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to drop a like and subscribe below if you feel like it, and I'll see you next time.